Okay, good morning. Welcome, you hardy Albertans, you. Willing to venture into ice and snow before 10 in the morning. Welcome, you techies who join us in your PJs online or with headphones in your ears on the bus or wherever you join us. Welcome to Southminster Steinhauer United Church. Wherever you are and however you join our circle, you are welcome. Whether you're a long-timer or a first-timer or somewhere in between, welcome. We try our best to be a radically inclusive community, which means as you find your way into this circle, find your own space, but also make space for others and make room for those who are missing. This is how we include. We recognize who isn't here yet, who needs to be, who wants to be. And so, welcome as we acknowledge who we are together in this circle of people for this place and in this time, on this land, this inheritance of previous generations that we share with our Indigenous brothers and sisters, on all who call this land, whether they call it Treaty 6 or whether they call this their ancestral or their adopted home. We recognize and honor this place and this land, and we find honor in expressing who we are, in living our gratitude and our commitments to peace and reconciliation. May we all know that moving forward and toward love is never easy, as single individuals or as communities. Moving that way is never easy, except for the friends and community that inspire us along the way. And so as we enter this place of belonging, may we open our hearts to each other, into this time with each other.
For some of us, this candle represents the spirit in each of us, a creative, compassionate spirit. In that sense, it's the light of us as individuals, but for many of us, this is the fire of community. We light this candle when it's time to begin a sacred time set aside for us together, this particular group, this particular morning, this community. We could have stayed at home and nurtured ourselves alone. That's important work. But this morning we chose to do that communally, with each other. And this light says, the time of community has now begun. Let's join our voices together as we strengthen our intentions. We are a grateful, open, and attentive people. We are grateful for the presence of creative spirit within, breathing dreams into our little bit of stardust. We are open to the presence of a compassionate spirit within, ever evolving in the energizing spirit within. May we awaken to all the possibilities that our lives hold and be stirred to grow in the ways of love, peace, and justice. As those who seek courage to create unity with one another, we pray. May it be so.
This is our time for all ages, and I welcome anyone who would like to come to this place right here to share a story. If you're a kid or a kid at heart, you're welcome to come on up here. Good morning, everyone. Hello. I really would love to share a story with you, and before I do, I want to just introduce it by having us think a little bit about our families. Our families, those who share our homes with us. Maybe it's mums, maybe it's dads, maybe it's grandparents, maybe it's brothers or sisters. All our families look different. But all those people that love us and support us, our families need love and support too. So all of us have each other. That's really important. But I also want us to think about all the people that you and your family hang out with. Sometimes you and your family might hang out with, I don't know, aunts and uncles or cousins. Maybe you have family friends, and that's important too. And I want you to think about all those people that you like your family to hang out with, because those are an important part of your community. And even if there's a group of you, like in your house, a group, like a family, still needs a community, still needs friends. So I wanted to read a story about that. It's called Empty Fridge. I kind of like this book because it's a weird shaped book. I think it kind of looks like a fridge. Okay, here we go. It's Empty Fridge by Gaetan Doremos. It's evening. Today, some people have spent their time chatting on the phone on their balconies. Others have been pedaling. Some people have been playing music nonstop. Others have had an exhausting day, while others have been having a long lunch. It's evening. Everyone's day has kept them very busy, so much so that no one has thought about buying anything to eat. This happens at my house all the time, I gotta tell you. It gets to be like 5 o'clock and we're like, oh no, what's for dinner? In this story, there's not a single packet of noodles in a single cupboard, not a single onion in anyone's fridge. To cut a long story short, it's a disaster. Take Andrew. He has next to nothing to eat. It's a crisis. Andrew has no choice. He goes upstairs to see his neighbor on the first floor. If only he has some peas. It looks like he has maybe 3 carrots here as he goes up the stairs. Here's Nabil. He's no better off than his neighbor downstairs. All he has in his fridge tonight are 2 eggs and a piece of cheese. Sorry, says Nabil. Oh dear, says Andrew, we're not going to get very far with 3 carrots, 2 eggs, and some cheese. Suddenly, Nabil drags Andrew up to the floor above. With a couple more ingredients from the family upstairs, we might be able to make a nice little vegetable bake, eh? Here are Lucy, Sandro, Julie, and Lilia. They're desperately trying to come up with a miracle recipe, using just a green capsicum and some chives, when there's a knock on the door. Andrew and Nabil ask them if they wouldn't happen to have a little something. We've only got a capsicum and some chives. Apologies, Lucy. It doesn't look like they will be able to make the vegetable bake after all. Now they all go up to the 3rd floor, hoping to find a new ingredient or a recipe, or even better, both. Now we meet Claire, 3rd floor Claire. There are some tomatoes sitting on her kitchen table. Claire offers to make a big mixed salad, but no one is too hot on the idea because it's a bit cold today. Does this also happen at your house? Someone suggests something and then other people go, oh, I don't want that. Maybe that's just my house. Okay, we're getting there. There's only one lady on the top floor left to see. Rose. She too has forgotten to go shopping. She rummages through her cupboards and unearths a little flour, some butter, and some milk. That's all the building can come up with, along with 3 carrots, 5 tomatoes, a capsicum, some chives, 2 eggs, and a little bit of cheese. What a pity there isn't another floor, they all think. It's getting serious. Rose invites all her neighbors into her living room so they can think more comfortably. They think and think and think. Suddenly, Rose gets to her feet, smiling. With all these ingredients, we can make a quiche. Some pastry, the mixture in the middle, and bingo, into the oven. We've got everything we need. There is general enthusiasm. The whole team heads into the kitchen. Nabil prepares the pastry with the flour and eggs while Julie butters the quiche dish. Rose preheats the oven, and they cut and slice and chat and laugh. Whoa. A little salt and pepper, some grated cheese on top, and voila, the quiche is ready for the oven. The only thing to do now is wait. All of a sudden, the neighbors start to notice a murmur coming from outside. They hurry out onto Rose's balcony. They are amazed to discover all the neighbors in the surrounding buildings are also gathered on the top floors. Everywhere they look in every direction, neighbors have come together to make their own quiches. Little by little, the streets and squares and nature strips fill up with tables, and the neighbors sit down to eat. Everywhere there is chattering and laughter. Thousands of quiches are shared and eaten. Slices of quiche, slices of life. It's such a pleasant and refreshing thing to do. People find themselves asking, why don't we do this every day? It's evening. Andrew has had a wonderful dream. Oh, it's a dream. It's a dream. but he still only has 3 carrots to eat. Darn it. Andrew is about to head off and search elsewhere when Nabil calls out to him. Remember Nabil? He lives upstairs, right? Well, they all live upstairs, but he lives just upstairs. Nabil calls out to him from the top of the stairs. Hey, Andrew, are you eating with us tonight? And look, there he goes, hip, hip, hooray, with his 3 carrots. And his musical instrument, of course. That's the end of the story. I love that. Andrew had just only 3 carrots, and then he had this fantastic dream that everyone shared their food and they worked together. Didn't they? They all gave what little bit they had and they worked together and they made something wonderful.
But they all had different food.
They all had different food.
So,
And it wasn't very good by itself, all those little bits, but when you put them all together, it's pretty good.
but everyone, like every building had different, different food.
Yeah, amazing.
So when they put them all together, they were different.
There were all different quiches and everyone worked together. And then he woke up and that hadn't really happened. But maybe for Andrew it was a brilliant idea. And then all of a sudden at the end, there was a little hint that maybe it really could happen in real life. Maybe they could make it happen. So I love that. It's a bit of a dream, but it's a bit of hope that, oh, maybe people can work together and make wonderful things like that happen with their communities. So I love it. I love it. So when you go home today, be with your families. That's your number one community, right? But also think about all the ways that the people that your family loves to hang out with make community and build stuff and maybe even cook together and do wonderful things. Thanks for sharing in this story. I want to invite you to Kids Spirit today. If you'd like to go, our leaders are here. Our piece of wisdom that comes next is a video put together from a speech that Stephen Hawking gave in 2015 at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting as part of a session on sustainable development, a vision for the future. These are inspiring words that one could imagine him giving as a speech. And in the world's remembering and honoring of this man this week that died, we hear Stephen Hawking in his own words.
I am very aware of the preciousness of time. Seize the moment. Act now. I have spent my life traveling across the universe, inside my mind. Through theoretical physics, I have sought to answer some of the great questions. But there are other challenges, other big questions which must be answered, and these will also need a new generation who are interested, engaged, and with an understanding of science. How will we feed an ever-growing population, provide clean water, generate renewable energy, prevent and cure disease, and slow down global climate change? I hope that science and technology will provide the answers to these questions, but it will take people, human beings with knowledge and understanding, to implement these solutions. One of the great revelations of the space age has been the perspective it has given humanity on ourselves. When we see the Earth from space, we see ourselves as a whole. We see the unity and not the divisions. It is such a simple image, with a compelling message: one planet, one human race. We are here together, and we need to live together, with tolerance and respect. We must become global citizens. I have been enormously privileged, through my work, to be able to contribute to our understanding of the universe. But it would be an empty universe indeed, if it were not for the people I love, and who love me. We are all time travelers, journeying together into the future. But let us work together to make that future a place we want to visit. Be brave, be determined, overcome the odds. It can be done.
These are the words from an eminent theoretical physicist remembered this week. I have a reading about instructions for community life from Romans. Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but with good judgment. Not all members of the community have the same function, so let's just go ahead and be who we are, without enviously or pridefully comparing ourselves with each other or trying to be something we aren't. If you speak, go ahead and speak. If you help, just help. Don't take over. If you teach, do it well. If you give encouraging guidance, be careful that you don't get bossy. This is funnier than I first thought. If you're put in charge, don't manipulate. If you're called to give aid to people in distress, keep your eyes open and be quick to respond. If you work with the disadvantaged, don't let yourself get irritated, but keep a smile on your face as your gift to them. Let your love be genuine, despise what is destructive, hold fast to what is good. Love one another with the affection of friends. Outdo one another in showing honor. Contribute to the needs of others, extend hospitality to strangers, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, regarding each other with esteem, out of your reverence for all that is sacred. These are words shared by early Christian communities. May we find wisdom for our living.
So I come from a family of 6, and like many families, as we were growing up, we each fell into certain roles. I'm sure you relate to this. I'm not going to say who's who, but in my family there was the responsible one, the smart one, the boss, the troublemaker, the athlete, the spoiled rotten. You're making guesses. You shouldn't do that. Often, these roles that are defined collectively for each other in our early lives stick with us, for better or for worse, sometimes for far longer than they should, because our identities, in large part, especially when we're young, are shaped by those around us, by the impressions they have of us, by our families, our friends, our communities of work and play. And even beyond our formative years, we draw identity from those we surround ourselves. We draw meaning and purpose from the groups and communities with which we spend our time. And that's important. Even though I'm now in my mid-40s, I think that you guessed right. My family still thinks I'm spoiled rotten. Let's talk about some science for a minute. When we learn about evolutionary biology, what we learn from that is that the very oldest part of our brain, the very first to develop for the early human, was the very base of the brain stem and the cerebellum. That part that controls our very most instinctive drives. Our drive for safety, whether that's fight or flight or freeze, or our drive for sustenance and food, or our drive to survive and procreate, our sex drive. One can imagine why it's the oldest and most important. If a mammal is going to survive, it needs those very fundamental drives to do it. But the second oldest part of the brain to evolve is our limbic system, and it developed as we became social creatures. in need of social instincts, kinship, bonding, status. So it's not just an accident that we always talk about community and family and those closest to us, what our friends are talking about, our identity as connected with those around us, because we're hardwired right there in our brain to be social creatures. We evolved, like many other mammals, with an innate drive to be together in groups and to bond with certain members of those groups. And it's all wrapped up in status and social conventions. So we don't just want to belong to a group, but there's something wired inside of us that has us wanting to know where we stand in that group. What's our status? Are we in good standing? Are we on the outs? How do we get back in the ins? This is part of our brain that's very satisfied when we know the organizational structure of the groups that we're in. Just who's making the decision and by what authority do they have to do that? We like to ask those questions, not because we're nosy or bossy, but because we're wired to do it. We want to know the structure of our groups and where we fit into it. I think we often give ourselves a hard time when we recognize that we have this desire to fit in still, that it doesn't go away, that we mature, but we still want to be liked. We want to be accepted. But this is an ancient part of who we are as humans, and maybe it helps us to look at a picture of a brain and know that that limbic system is at work in all of us, and that we could maybe just ease up on ourselves a little bit once we understand that our very genetic coding has us look to our groups to help us understand ourselves. And that those questions about being accepted and fitting in and included are just part of being human. Sometimes you hear a story that makes you realize just how important our relationships and our social connections really are. And one such example is in meeting writer Johann Hari in his recent book, Lost Connections. Hari, like many, came up close and personal with the challenges of drug addiction. When he discovered that some members of his family and his close friends were losing battles with the problem. And he sought to find out more. He wanted to know more. He wanted to know why. And some of what he learns, very interestingly, is, as he says, that we have this myth in our culture that keeps getting reinforced again and again in believing that drugs are addictive because of the drugs. That we believe that there are chemical hooks in these drugs, and there are chemical hooks in the drugs. But he cites the common held understanding that if you gave 20 of us random people heroin for 4 weeks, that at the end of those 4 weeks we'd have 20 drug addicts. Based on that understanding, we've said that the solution is you've got to remove the chemical. You've got to remove these drugs and punish anyone who has them or takes them. So based on this, in North America, we put those who deal and who take drugs into jails. We make them suffer because we believed it would deter them and make them stop. And Hari's point is that the numbers across North America would prove that that isn't working. But recent research, he indicates, is saying that myth that the problems with drug addiction are the drugs and the hooks in the drugs may not be true. Johann Hari describes that this understanding that what makes drugs addictive is the drugs themselves is for a large part based on research in the 70s done with rats. And I'll just share briefly what that was. In the 70s, rats were experimented on, given 2 water bottles, one with just water and one laced with heroin. And the rats chose the drugged water. And then the more they had the drugged water, the more they chose the drugged water. They became addicted to that, and then they overdosed in very short order. The rats were alone in wired cages at the time, and research in the 2000s repeated this experiment, but altering one of those parameters. This time, the experimenters gave the rats a palatial, rat heavenly place to live. If you were a rat, this would be Shangri-La. This is the place where they had plenty of food. They had plenty of mazes and places to go and things to do to occupy their mind and their bodies. And they had other rats to connoiter with, if you know what I mean. And what happened was that they didn't obsessively consume the drugged water. And 0 rats overdosed. And the conclusion at the end of this study was that the rats had what makes life meaningful to a rat. And addiction was thwarted, even though the drugs were readily available. So, what could this mean for humans? And just my last point with Johann Hari, he cites 2 examples, Switzerland and Portugal, in the world as interesting examples. Instead of punishing addicts, these 2 countries took somewhat radical positions and took all the money that would be used to prosecute and house and punish addicts and doubled down on supporting them. If you have a drug problem in Switzerland, for example, you'd be assigned to a clinic. And there you could take drugs at your leisure, supervised by nurses, and then you would go to your job, and they would say, okay, time to go to work, or how are you getting to work tomorrow? Because along with treatment on the health side, there have been massive job creation programs, subsidized work programs, support groups, and systems to integrate people into new and healthy communities. And surprisingly, he shares the results that in Switzerland, after 15 years of this program, there have been 0 deaths from drug overdose on the legal heroin program. And overall drug use in the country is down significantly. Rats and humans, it seems that if we have lives that are filled with healthy relationships and positive bonds, we have less of a need to bond with other less healthy things. If we have healthy relationships and positive bonds in our lives, we are much less likely to bond with other less healthy things, because bonding is what our limbic system wants us to do. We want to bond. We want to feel connected. But just what will we connect with? That seems to be the question. And if we do find addiction as part of our lives, it seems that the solution is for more support and more connection, not less, or the threat of less. I'm always fascinated by this idea of interventions when an addict is surrounded by their support system, and the results and the effects of their behavior is shared with them. It seems that is a way of supporting while help is achieved. But if that turns into the threat of withdrawing that support if nothing changes, then it's feeding into the problem rather than the solution. Switzerland and Portugal seem to give us the wisdom that policies based on shame and stigma don't work. They lead to downward spirals and isolation. But policies based on love and compassion work much more effectively. That with support and human connection, that regardless of whether you succeed or whether you fall down and fail again, we're here for you. That helps lives get put back together. It seems like community has the power not only to impact our identity, but to shape our health and our resilience. So last Wednesday night, we hosted a speaker speaking to us in the Beyond series, speaking on Wendell Berry's life and work. Wendell Berry, author, poet, activist. And here's a man who speaks often about the role of community, and it reminded me of this one quote of Wendell Berry's that is here. If we are looking for insurance against want and oppression, we will find it only in our neighbor's prosperity and goodwill. And beyond that, in the good health of our worldly places, our homelands. If we were sincerely looking for a place of safety, for real security and success, then we would begin to turn to our communities, and not the communities simply of our human neighbors, but also of the water, earth, and air, the plants and animals, all the creatures with whom our local life is shared. He believes that the health of the individual is linked inseparable from the health of everything around you. So when we ask the question in a series on identity about who am I, we can't really do it, Berry would say, without asking, who are we? And this is the value of having time to ponder these very questions. That we're not any one thing. That we are not just this cosmic identity, this mixture of atomic and subatomic particles that make up the universe. We are more than that. We are not just humans with brain function and connection with every human on the planet. We are more than that. We are also communities. Smaller, manageable groups of people that can figure out how to support and love and care for one another. I think Wendell Berry echoes the sentiments we find in the community instructions written to the young Christian community in Rome in the decades following Jesus' death. This community, as with all those kind of early Christian communities, are a group of people trying to figure out how to organize themselves around a whole new kind of structure that they're not used to. This new community in Rome, part of the Roman Empire, and all of a sudden are now creating a community that's trying to build itself around these teachings about love and forgiveness and compassion and justice in the example of their teacher, and they're bound to have some bumps along the way. And these letters to them reveal just how many bumps there were, that it's a total attitude adjustment. It's a total paradigm shift to all of a sudden orient your life to love and compassion when what you've been used to is the way of the empire. So these instructions give them some encouragement to think of the community not as this cutthroat competition, but more like each person working together based on strengths, based on what you've got in your empty fridge. Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. Not all the members of the community have the same function. So let's just go ahead and be who we are without enviously or pridefully comparing ourselves with each other or trying to be something we aren't. If this letter were written to my family of origin, I think it would say something like, if you're smart, just be smart and contribute. If you're a troublemaker, make trouble for those who do injustice and leave me alone. Oh, wait, I added that. If you're bossy, find a way to turn that towards positive leadership. If you're spoiled rotten, share the wealth, etc., etc. In other words, how are we using who we are to make our communities stronger and better? Nothing says we are who we hang around with more than these early Christian communities. We aren't just what we eat. We are who we hang out with. We're reminded to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who are weeping. What better instruction around compassion? Or another that's like it. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member's honored, all rejoice together with it. These instructions for community life speak to us at a time when there's lots of connection happening with our thumbs and not a lot of connection happening flesh and blood. That our health is only as good as our community's health. Like I said earlier, we remember and celebrate the inspiring life and work of Stephen Hawking this week, and two lines jump out at me from that speech that we heard a few moments ago. One of them is this: I've been enormously privileged through my work to be able to contribute to our understanding of the universe. But it would be an empty universe indeed if not for the people I love and who love me. We are more than the labels given to us by our families. We're more than the accumulation of our own wisdom and knowledge and experience. We're more than isolated beings. We could have a solo spiritual life. We could. There's lots to be gained from reading and improving ourselves and engaging in all sorts of solitary practices. But if we don't have a positive and valuable community, or if that takes the place completely of positive and valuable community, we won't fully know who we are. It would be an empty universe indeed if we didn't have people to encourage us and love us. And I might go a step further than that, maybe more important than that even. It would be empty if we didn't have those vastly different from us that grade against our assumptions, that collide with our easy views and biases, that we have to somehow disagree with and engage with and figure out how to still be in community with. How we treat each other as we learn who we are and do what we need to do is really the whole point. It's the practice field. Communities are practice fields. They are rehearsal halls. The ground on which we discover how we live out who we are. It's where we make mistakes when we get a little too bossy, or we try to take over when we're helping, or all the other things that letter was pointing out. When we do those things, it's where we can do them and be surrounded by those who will pick us up again, forgive us, and say, okay, we'll try this again. And we have every reason to care, because we're only as healthy as our communities are. If we're sick as a group, we're sick as individuals. And as we work together to make them stronger and fitter, we are stronger and fitter. So the last words this morning belong to Hawking. We're all time travelers journeying together into the future, so let's work together to make that future a place we want to visit. May it be so in so many ways. So one of the ways that we've been talking about our identity over the last 3 weeks in this series is to share symbols with one another in a little segment that we like to call this. Thank you, Mufasa. We've remembered who we are in the first week as cosmic beings, as ones who are made of the stuff of the universe, and we remembered both the substance of water and wheat as our connection to the land and to the cosmic beads of the universe that reminded us of all of that. And as we shared these symbols, we encouraged each of you to perhaps make a place in your homes over these weeks where you could find symbols that are meaningful to you, that reminded you of your identities in all of these ways. In the second week, we spoke about our human identity, and Nancy shared the symbol of the Inukshuk that reminded us of the accumulated wisdom that gets stacked upon each other as humans have evolved, and that can point the way, not only for us, but for future generations. This morning, as we speak about our identity as community people, Nell Owens is going to share a symbol with us as perhaps some inspiration as we all think about what symbol in our lives might speak to us for this day. Thanks, Nell.
So first, a little background to my symbol. In the 1870s and 1880s, over about a 10-year lifespan, or lifespan of the development of the project, there was a Jewish-Polish ophthalmologist who developed a language called Esperanto. And I see some of you have heard of it. And his vision was that this would be a language that would be a living language, that it would be a language that would be fairly easy to learn, that anybody could learn, and that it would enable people all over the world to speak together so that they would have a way to resolve their differences and develop things in community. So that was his vision, that it would be something that would bring peace to the world. Now, there is actually an Esperanto Wikipedia, if you wanted to look that up, and Esperanto is in Google Translate. So it is there, and it's still found in more than 100 countries in the world. So that's a bit of background to it. And sort of the heyday of it was around the 1920s, after the First World War. Now, the second part of background is about my maternal grandfather, who was born in 1903. Now, he was an older teenager then after the First World War ended and the Spanish flu pandemic killed so many people in the world. And then he just got married before the Depression hit the world, so lived through all those years of economic instability. And when he was sort of back on his feet, and he and his wife, my grandmother, were establishing their family and working at establishing their business, the Second World War broke out. And so he had quite a lot of upheaval in his life. And I don't think I mentioned that he lived in Holland. He was actually born a Dutch Calvinist, although he didn't end his life that way. So what I've brought along here is my grandfather's Esperanto Bible. You can see it's quite well used and quite well worn. It's called the Sancto Biblio, and it has a little paper in the front cover, which is an article that he wrote for an Esperanto publication in March of 1934. Now, I've had this for many years now, and I never could read it because it was Esperanto, but it just occurred to me this morning that I could put it in Google Translate and actually find out what my grandfather had written. It is something kind of theological reflection because it has the word Christos in it, which is, what they would have used. So I bring this today as a symbol. It connects me, of course, to my grandfather, to my extended family in Europe. It connects me to a culture that is part of my heritage, but that I don't live every day. And it connects me, I think, to a broad spectrum of a world community that exists because of this effort of Esperanto. And I think that as a spiritual community today, we have all kinds of efforts toward peace and justice, and we're involved in all those things. But this book reminds me that as that kind of community, we live in the shadow of so many communities before us who have, in different kinds of ways, tried to establish that mentality in a global kind of way. So I'm not going to stand it up. I'm just going to sit it on the table here, and I'd invite anyone who wants to come and look at it after Chris is done to do that. So there it is.
So the time of this exact community is done for the day. But a light remains in each of us. It can shine brightly when we're on our own. May it shine just as bright when we're in our many communities that we're part of this week. Let's wake up to the gift of our communal selves. Let's sing.
Hey, it's Christopher. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to watch last week's video, click this button right here. If you can manage it and can donate to SSUC to help us continue this video page, click right here. And for any information that you want about SSUC and our programs, visit our website right there.